with great pleasure that I welcome you and warmly so to the African Development Bank Group's pre-annual meetings press conference. And we would like to share with you the theme and other details of this year's annual meetings to be held here in Accra, Ghana.
Ghana will host the African Development Banks Group's 2022 annual meeting from the 23rd to the 27th of May in its capital, Accra. This year's meeting marks a return to in-person sessions following virtual meetings over the last 2 years. The physical sessions, including statutory meetings of governors of the bank and knowledge events, will take place at the Accra International Conference Centre. In preparation for this year's annual meetings, the African Development Bank Group held a virtual press conference on Wednesday, April 20th, 2022. The press conference featured Professor Vincent Emehiele, Secretary General of the Banks Group, Dr. Kevin Karuki, Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate and Green Growth, Kevin Urama, Acting Chief Economist and Vice President for Governance and Knowledge Management, amongst others.
As you may be aware, the African Development Bank Group is made up of 3 distinct entities: the African Development Bank, the African Development Fund, and the Nigeria Trust Fund. These were the original entities that form what we call the African Development Bank Group.
Professor Vincent Emehiele spoke during the virtual press conference convened to brief journalists about the agenda of the 5-day meetings.
This year's annual meetings will be organized in a hybrid format, more physically catering to the shareholders and some participants, while others will join virtually. The objectives of these annual meetings as a statutory event of the bank group is that the Board of Governors, as the highest decision-making and oversight organs of the board of the bank group, will review the annual report on the finances, operations, and other activities of the bank and the fund during the preceding year. They will adopt resolutions on key decisions and conclusions of the annual meetings. In addition, there will be the Governors' Dialogue, where governors will engage on the strategic outlook of the bank group in the coming years in the attainment of the African Union Agenda 2063 and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, among other development imperatives.
The theme for the 2022 annual meetings is Achieving Climate Resilience and a Just Energy Transition for Africa. The meeting will offer bank governors a forum to share the climate change and energy transition challenges that their countries face. They also present an opportunity to showcase policy responses to tackle these challenges.
The theme of the annual meetings is Achieving Climate Resilience and a Just Energy Transition for Africa, which responds to the bank's priority areas, particularly the energy area, as well as other composite areas that speak to sustainability in Africa's socio-economic development.
The theme was chosen to provide a framework for the governors of the banks to share their experiences and engage in addressing climate change and energy transition challenges, as well as their policies and measures to deal with them.
One unique aspect of the annual meetings this year is the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the African Development Fund.
The annual meetings are the bank group's most important event, attracting around 3,000 delegates and attendees yearly. The meetings allow the organization to take stock of progress with its shareholders. They also provide a unique forum for representatives of governments, business, civil society, think tanks, academia, and the media to discuss key issues concerning Africa's ongoing development. Professor Urama emphasized the bank's role as a thought leader in Africa, saying the meetings would include 3 main knowledge events that would touch on topics such as building a digital economy, green jobs for youths, and a special session on climate change.
The first one will be focusing on climate resilience and just transitions in Africa, how we can drive towards a net zero carbon pathway for Africa's development. We will use this opportunity to to have high-level events where we will launch the African Economic Outlook Report that is focusing on supporting climate resilience and just energy transitions in Africa. We all know the relevance of climate change. We all know the relevance of energy transitions and the new drive towards net zero carbon pathways for achieving sustainable development globally. So this event will enable us to be able to interrogate that specific policy position of moving towards a net zero transition in Africa, globally, and what it means for Africa's development, how Africa should respond to it, and what opportunities and co-benefits there are for Africa in that new development trajectory that is here to stay with us. Then after that high-level event, which happens on the first day, we're going to have a second knowledge event that is on building a digital economy for a resilient Africa. So this event will be focusing on riding the global opportunities that in digitization and all the opportunities that delivers for driving a greener, more inclusive, more sustainable Africa through effective digital infrastructure for the continent. Then the third event that happens on the third day is on green jobs for youths and women in post-COVID-19 Africa. We all have seen both in our AEO report, the African Economic Outlook report of 2020, and also the forthcoming report of 2021, that the impacts of COVID-19 on jobs for youths and women and unemployment generally, both in Africa and globally, has been significant. So this particular event will look at the opportunities for green jobs for African youths and women as we drive towards a post-COVID-19 recovery. And then finally, we will have another knowledge event, the fourth one, coming up on the fourth day, on supporting climate resilience in African agri-food systems. And we will focus on building resilient rural economies for a food-secure and prosperous Africa.
For the next 5 years, between 2020 and 2025, we actually intend to double the amount of climate finance, in other words, funding that is available to support African countries build resilience. We will double that amount of money to $25 billion over the next 5 years, because over the last 5 years, we've spent about $13 billion in this regard. And one thing that I want to emphasize here is that, cognizant of the fact that Africa's greatest interest is on adaptation, in other words, how the countries are able to respond to what is now prevalent and is likely to be with us for the next 20 years, the impacts of climate change. What we've done is that we focus on adaptation, and we are the only, of the amount of money that we dedicate to climate finance, we dedicate at least 50%. In fact, last year we dedicated 67% of our entire climate finance budget to adaptation.
According to Dr. Martin, the $1.5 billion food plan would address immediate needs triggered by the ongoing conflict in Europe. The plan will support farmers with seeds and fertilizers in the next wet season, which starts around October in the Southern Hemisphere.
The bank has, as you have heard already, $1 billion to immediately respond to the food price crisis. And as I mentioned before, this is basically to support farmers with seeds and fertilizers in the next coming seasons. That's the wet season in the Northern Hemisphere, the wet season in the Southern Hemisphere that starts in November, October. And then also, we intend to help countries, bridge the supply gap for fertilizer, and also some policy reforms. This is all short term.
The bank also has a medium to long-term plan to help countries build resilience, known as Mission 1 for 200, which will help farmers boost production to 100 million tons of food to reach 200 million people.
But the bank also has a more medium to longer term to help countries build resilience.
and it's called Mission 1 for 200. That's a mission of another $1 billion beyond the emergency to actually help farmers produce more food, a total of 100 million tons of food that will reach 200 million people. So that's why we call it Mission 1 for 200.
The governors who represent the institution's 54 African and 27 non-regional member countries will hold a high-level dialogue with the African Development Bank's president, Akinwumi Adesina, and his senior management team. The discussions will focus on how to boost funding for climate adaptation and related matters. Climate adaptation finance currently accounts for only 10% of global climate finance. Overall, only about 19% of total international adaptation finance is programmed in Africa, with the continent receiving only 3% of global climate finance flows.
I have to say, youths and women in Africa are about the most innovative I've seen, especially on this digital inclusion and digital economic revolutions that we're seeing. So we need to be able to provide an environment that allows them to thrive and compete globally.
This year's theme aligns with the preparations for the United Nations Global Climate Summit. It will highlight Africa's need for increased investment and other forms of financing to accelerate climate adaptation efforts.
We actually, as a bank, are very keen to support, indeed, all African countries in developing their transition plan and translating those transition plans into viable pipeline of projects. We also need to adapt our power systems to be able to be compliant with the Paris Agreement goals of 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius. So I think all these are memorialized in what is called national determined contributions, and these become part of the binding agreements between a country and the global community. So it's not a question of individual politicians, it is a question of a state committing to fulfill its obligations under the Paris Agreement through the national determined contributions. And in future, we are also now working very closely with the governments to help them develop just energy transition plans, which again must constitute part of the national determined contributions and even what we call the long-term strategies, which are much longer, say for 20 to 30 years.
The 2022 African Development Bank Group's annual meetings will be the 57th annual meeting of the Board of Governors of the Bank Group and the 48th annual meeting of the African Development Fund, the concessional arm of the Bank Group.